So I just, first of all, I want to thank everybody for agreeing to gather here at Stockton University. And one of the things that was exciting for me when I was organizing this is the fact that everybody at the panel today is working with crossing the disciplinary boundaries, but everybody is coming from rather different space. So personally for me, as an artist who used to be solitary in my artistic production and still am, but at the same time I'm excited about organizing like projects and bringing students and scholars and artists together. So that is like my angle where I come into the collaborative practice. And I just wanted to ask you, because for me it was weird and serendipitous, and I could thank Stockton for that, because until I came to Stockton I didn't see a lot of room for me to collaborate in my own practice, but now I'm like really excited. So if anybody wanted to tell, like, how did it really happen to you? Because our audience going to be students, and my objective is to really show them that collaborations happen spontaneously and randomly, and just the fact is you just need to follow through and stick with the project. So I think one of my objectives in organizing that was to encourage students to try it and to see how it could be done. So, and as a distinguished panel, please don't scare students, but tell us how did collaboration enter your practice, and how did it happen that you crossed between art and science in whichever way you did? So, and there's no specific like order.
So for for us anyway, a lot of it begins with conversations with people. So, you know, one project we worked on recently with letterpress, people were talking to us about the issues that we're having and things that we could do. So together, you know, we had certain technologies that we used, you know, with the 3D printing, and we were talking to these people, and they said, you know, we have this problem, and we said, well, you know, maybe we can get together and figure out specifically what your problem is, and then how we could bring the technologies that we employ to maybe address those issues. So a lot of it becomes, you know, you just talk to people, and people have issues, and you have issues, and you want to do something, and they want to do something, and you find this common ground, and then you figure out how you can do it.
I mean, it can also be, I mean, for me, it was put into my practice as part of grad school. At Arizona State, John Rousseau in the letterpress shop was a really big collaborator. Every year they were working on a new book with a new person from a different department, whether it was architecture or economics or different things like that. So I kind of saw that happening, but then we also had other times in which we brought artists in to the shop. Like Mary Hood did this project every 2 years, the mapping project, where she would bring native artists down for 2 weeks, and we would crank out editions for them. And many of them had no printmaking experience at all, so we had to really understand their imagery and how to translate it and have that conversation back and forth. So for me, it just became a natural part of being an artist specifically in printmaking at the time. And then afterwards, it was like, I got out of grad school, I was teaching in DC, and I was like, how do I continue doing this? And for some reason, it just popped in my head that there was a really nice blend of similarities between the scientific method and the printmaking print shop method of how we play and try stuff and make stuff and talk about whether it works or not, and then how to make it better through critiques. And I just decided to see what would happen if we actually forced those two together.
Well, for us, Victor described how we started working with the letterpress studio, but I think even more than that, our collaborations come from random meetings and me being very nosy. Because when I meet somebody, I'm always, oh, what do you do? And that's how I met Mariana. I was in Venice. Mariana was doing a residency in Venice. We just went to see the school there because we're part of the Boston Printmakers, and they had a school there. So we wandered in, met Mariana from New Jersey, and had a 5-minute conversation that said what we did. And she said, I'll call you. And you know what that usually means, like, no one's ever going to call me. But she did call, and we did this collaboration. last year with her students, where they work with the environmental science department, and they did a photo shoot, and we came here for 5 sessions. And in 5 sessions, we got her students to do this beautiful art piece, and they had worked with somebody else, and it was truly random. And the letterpress people, it was the same way. We gave a workshop on how to do 3D printing, and one of the people who took the workshop said, I want you to meet somebody. And these were these artists, Esther Smith and Deco Faust from Purgatory Pie Press, who were having a problem reproducing 1840s type. And they just talked about it, and we said, we think we could help you. So I think that's how it comes about.
I actually tripped over it. A simple walk in the woods. Stockton University is in the Pinelands National Reserve. It's a UN International Biosphere Reserve that's larger than Yosemite National Park. And it was at one time a polar desert in the Ice Age, with the sugar sands blowing all around. So I just want to bring this one rock up. This was found just off campus, and it's what we call a Brazil nut, that if you're in Antarctica, you could actually see. It has been exquisitely sculpted by wind in a polar desert, and it has a glaze over it of burnished silicas, manganese, and iron, and it attests to ancient climate change. And so people in the Pine Barrens collect these as art forms. There's a gentleman out in California that collects these, and he sells these as, he tried as Ventifax, wind-fastened stones, didn't sell one at the Desert Museum, and instead called them rebellious rocks, and he now has a living off of stones just like this right here. So just nature appreciation is enough sometimes to, the art in the stone has physics behind this that Jet Propulsion Laboratory has yet to explain.
I think for me, as an ecologist, my training and just training in general, kind of late 20th century science and R1 academia has really meant that you need to kind of stay in your lane in terms of science. And when I've talked to some of my artist colleagues, they say it's kind of the same. So for me, collaborating and doing art and science work has really been kind of a side hustle. But it's been a place where I have a lot of passion. I did a postdoc at a climate change institute at Columbia. And I've spent a lot of time showing people graphs and data and feeling a dramatic sense of urgency about ecosystems, about climate change. And I'll tell you, nothing speaks to people like art does. So no amount of, so for me, part of it is I would agree that there's these serendipitous conversations that are really awesome. And I would say that's how I got into doing some of this work. But also some of it has just been like play. Like, oh, I met this person, and could we make paper out of invasive plants? Well, boy, do we have a lot of invasive plants. I think we should try it. And just kind of giving yourself the time and space to go from there, and to be willing to fail. But for me, part of it was realizing that some of the ecological challenges that we have are so great, and our ability as scientists to touch someone's heart is so limited, but I think art really speaks to people in a passionate kind of way. Out of comparison, go to any science conference and then go to an art opening and tell me how those things are different. So I just find that that the collaboration is the key, rather than one of those disciplines being in service to the other. So together we're trying to solve a problem, or we're having this conversation, or what if we try this thing? So that collaborative part, I think, is the essential element.
Yeah, I don't think my current collaboration with Guy Riefler and Michelle Shively and the whole acid mine drainage team would have happened if I hadn't have earlier on tried out a first effort at collaboration with scientists. So when it was 2007-ish, 6, somewhere around there, I had as per your sheet, Mariana, I had a weird idea. as an artist, I'm like, I want to talk about this, that, and the other, which had to do with really big math and really accurate figures about our universe and things. And I didn't want to get it wrong. I didn't want to put it out there and be the artist who's like, well, he's an artist, he doesn't know math. And I'm like, yeah, I really don't. So I need an expert, right? So that's when I actually sought out astrophysicists to help me with that math. And that's all I wanted, was like, am I going to look foolish, or is the math correct? And that initial conversation turned into something where they got really excited about being able, to your point, communicate their field and that math in a way that really reached out in a true cultural, psychological, and emotional impact, right? And so that surprised me, and I was like, that's great. And then we expanded from there, and that collaboration grew into a very large project that is still touring internationally. And in that, and understanding how the sciences work and how the scientists' mind work and how their field, right, works differently, how they need to communicate in their field. I think that has been something that gave me the right kind of soft entry into the next collaboration so that it wouldn't scare them away. And I think it's really important to not worry about that first encounter and getting it right and having all the answers or having it click. Just start that conversation with someone else in a disparate discipline. That will build your next, maybe bigger one, you know?
Agree.
My turn.
Sorry.
So I make books, and I've been making books for 40 years, I suppose. So I worked with a lot of craft people like paper marblers or book binders, but it was always more appropriation than collaboration, really, because I'd see something somebody was doing that I'd like, and I'd say, hey, can you do that for me? When it comes to I've worked with biologists quite a bit. It kind of starts out that way. Like, I did a study of mayflies and was casting around in the local fly fishing community, and I got steered towards this biologist that had been studying mayflies for like his career, like for 30 years with the University of Wisconsin. And so I got a hold of Clark Gary, and right away I could tell. Talk about passionate. He was so passionate. Excuse me. About mayflies, and that was totally infectious. And when he realized that I was seriously falling in love with mayflies too, I mean, he was all in. He showed me which microscope to get. He gave me collecting nets. He steered me to the right, I bought a case of little vials for collecting specimens, and I would collect specimens, and I would send them to him. Well, first I'd cut the blocks, make the engravings, and I'd send them to Dr. Gary, and he would put them through the entomological keys and send me back an entomological identification. And that became the basis of a text. But sometimes he couldn't come to species for some reason. He'd get stumped, and being a scientist, he refused to speculate. He wouldn't send me anything. And so I said, well, can you write notes, explain why you couldn't come to species? And so he started making notes, and by the end of our 2-year correspondence, there wasn't any entomology left at all. He was just writing notes all the time. And the last thing he wrote was, taxonomy is an extremely dynamic discipline. And he explained that the first insect he identified for me they changed the name, they revised the keys, and it was no longer what he said it was 2 years before. And so the conclusion I came to from that whole process was that the realization I had was that science is fluid, just like art is fluid, just like everything's fluid. And so collaboration for me is just, in that case and in a lot of other cases, that I just stumble across somebody and we just kind of hit it off and things start to happen and grow into wherever it grows into.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to follow up on that. Yeah, I think shared excitement is something that I saw time and time again bonding people together. And I have, because I pulled you all into this room, because I randomly came across and met people, and I have this, for example, with Kim, my eye-opening for the possibility of collaboration was, we were just chatting and I didn't know you that much. I was an art professor at Columbus College for Design. So it's a private school. There are hardcore art people. And you were our resident scientist. So we were drinking coffee, and I was excited about printmaking, and I was like, and then it can be green. And what if we do that? And Kim was listening to me, and she said, you're like operating on the level of alchemy. Like your engagement is kind of like rooted. And I was like, yes, I can roll with that. But there's a moment where, the inquisitive look seems to be shared, like in art and science, like be able to be excited about like inquisitive look. So when it gels, it's fantastic. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you, as somebody who have like worked on successful and less than successful, can you give an advice on how to overcome like either resistance or rejections, or like the moments where the efforts kind of don't work out, and how to keep being excited? Like if you have any suggestion, because I had my share of like attempts where I had to be like, well, that's not gonna work ever, so I'll go the other direction. But basically I had to walk myself through and understanding this is one off. So do you have like examples or advice to people who are trying to engage, but like maybe disheartened at the moment? And that's where like you all are kind of like speaking from a place of authority, giving the advice to people who just started on the path of collaboration and scared to death.
Well, I think we could be an authority on rejection. That's a good one. Because we didn't have the standard art backgrounds. We're not art professors. So already it's a problem because we go to SGCI, it's all backed by schools. So we're sort of on the fly, and we have different backgrounds. We have science backgrounds, health backgrounds. We just have business backgrounds, and we came to art through pottery, through woodworking, so we just naturally use all those things in our art. So we have no boundaries because we were never taught to have boundaries. So a lot of what we do is woodworking ideas that are brought to printmaking, so that's how we work. So when we meet people, we just say who we are, but we don't have any credentials. So a lot of times we want to collaborate, and they're like, who are you? Like they don't get to know anything we could do, and they're not interested. Or sometimes we work with an artist and we put a lot of work in. Like the artist says what they want to do with the plates. We show them our 3D printed plates, and we talk about what we could do. And then when push comes to shove, they're standard printmakers, and they look at the plates and they go, I feel so much more comfortable with my copper plates. They don't even want to try them. So we made them these beautiful plates. We've made, deep embossments, and they're just, you know what? It takes too much work for me to learn how to do something new. So you just have to say, okay, you're right, this project will not work, and we'll move on, and other artists embrace it.
So I think when you're starting a collaboration, you kind of have an idea of something that's X number of steps down the road, but you don't know how you're going to get there. And excuse me. A lot of times what happens is you get into these places where it becomes difficult because you don't know what the next step's going to be, or the previous step didn't turn out the way that you wanted it to turn out. So for us, I think what happens is you have to take a step back and refocus on what the thing is that you wanted to do, and then recenter and say, is it still possible, even though these things didn't work out? Is it still a goal that we have, or do we change the goal, or is the goal modified in some way? But I think we find in pretty much all the collaborations that you do, there's always a step where you just become disheartened. I mean, I've never been in a collaboration where there wasn't a place where you say, this is just not going to work. And we usually find that that's the place where it works after that. If you can kind of power through that really bad place, then the rest of it kind of comes much easier.
I think there's always a way, when you come across a problem. Like, we were working with a paper maker on that big book, and we did like this prototype like 2 years before she actually started producing the paper for us. And we had this prototype for like a year, taking it around to shows and stuff, and it was fine. Everything was working fine. And then she starts making the paper, and we're stacking it up on shelves with, like, we had a piece of white paper between each bundle of paper. And we started noticing that the dye she was using, the pigments were leaching onto the white paper. So we had a huge problem. we were in the middle of production, we were printing, and you know, there was nothing we could do. And in the end, we had to, we ended up buying a lot of very expensive Kozo tissue to use as interleaving and stuff. But in the end, the Kozo tissue really slowed down the viewing of the book, which wasn't our intention, but it had an effect on the overall thing that was begun with a problem that, you know, we had to overcome. I think there's always an answer. And actually, it's those problems that make things deflect in different ways that keep things interesting.
Yeah, I would say that I always think of art science collaboration as like potluck cooking. You know, you're going to bring a potato, I'm going to bring some carrots, you know, and if we were working together, I would only have carrot salad, but we're going to make a casserole, but we're doing it on the fly and we don't know how it's going to go. We don't have a recipe. And I think that the advice that I would give someone who is trying this is, you know, be prepared for some of these barriers, be prepared to let go of some of your expectations. So if you're really collaborating and making a third casserole instead of carrot salad, you've got to be prepared to not always be steering the things in the kitchen. So so that I think that working individually with your own vision and executing a project has really different outcomes. But I think working with colleagues can sometimes take you to these wonderful places that you wouldn't go, like intellectually and emotionally, spiritually. Like there's lots of wonderful outcomes. One of the things that I've been doing is I've been presenting almost like a proselytization, like to scientists. I go to professional conferences and I give workshops and tell my colleagues this is why it's really rewarding to work with artists and to encourage collaboration. And I think a lot of the scientists that I've encountered have kind of a misguided idea that this collaboration means let me invite you to my field site and then you can paint it, right? So it's like your work is in service to my work. And I think the best collaborations kind of leave that behind. You know, you're actually trying to do something together. So I would say try to seek that and maybe let go of the control idea so much and be prepared for failure. But keep going.
I'm going to democratize this a little bit. In the Pinelands, once again, landscape appreciation is in everybody's bailiwick here. I go to this rich folklore here in the Pine Barrens, and we have places called blue holes that are like bottomless pits that the Jersey Devil swims up. And you go to these places, and even though this is landscape and nuance, it turns out that scientifically they actually have an answer. They're nalids. They're actually what the Russians call nalidi, which are miniature glaciers that form in the Pine Barrens in the Ice Age. So people who have seen these things, looked at the landscape, recognized there was an unusual thing here. Without the science, they developed this beautiful folklore and storytelling to help explain. Everybody wants to have an answer to this. And so I use folklore to do research here on the geomorphology of the Pinelands and to good effect.
That's fun.
I think spinning off of what you were saying, Kim, is that one of the things we ran into a lot was that we would, initially with the acid mine drainage team, we would put out our idea and we would say, this is what's going to happen. And it falls exactly in between pure research and applied. And so we go after an NSF grant and they'd be like, no, it's not pure research enough. We'd be like, okay, well then we'll go after this grant. And they're like, well, no, that's really too much research. And we're like, wait, what? So that initial, for like 6 years, we just couldn't get funding. People just saw it like, oh, is he painting this? Like, is he just going to paint you at the, right? Totally. Or from guys' side, they're like, well, why are you going to make a product out of it? That's not, no, you just tell us what the chemistry is. So there is this place where I think you're accurate in it. In a long-term collaboration, losing the specificity of the disciplines and coming together into a new space is really critical for that, to get over these humps. But one of the other things is that there are times when you have to think about the project in terms of not a compromise, but a better short-term strategy to get to the longer-term goal, right? So there's times when we have to not talk about it as an art project, shift it and talk about it into much more of a research-based thing to get just enough funding to get over that hump that you're talking about, because they will work out eventually, and to Gaylord's point. But, and then other times, like the whole Kickstarter campaign, the whole idea was, well, it's artists only, it's paint only really, it shifts into this realm of social media, of outreach, of visual storytelling. And then that gets us another hump that gets us the rest of the funding for the pilot plan to do this. And I think shifting and allowing and trusting that when it shifts into the other discipline very specifically, that it's going to come back to that collaboration at some point and be much more successful over the long term. I think if you can allow for that and be in those situations, that's where we've managed to get through what were some very dark years where we thought, we're done. We were literally in cars driving around the hills of Appalachia going, no one cares, no funding, we're done. I mean, we're done, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think just being open to, just keeping your mind open when you start the project is the best way to go with it. I mean, every time I've done a collaboration or had others talk about their collaborations when it came to the portfolios, it was just going in and just having a conversation and not worrying, not having an expectation based off of what that person's research is or what that person's previous art is and things like that. And I think what's been nice about it is some of the prints that have come through, I'm like, oh, that's definitely your print. Like, I know that's your print. But most of them are very different from the typical body of work that most of these artists have done in the past that I recognize, because they're leaving themselves open to the influence of the imagery and the research and the ideas of their collaborator for it. I mean, if I have 3 prints upstairs, you would never tell that any of them were all mine, because I let what the person was doing their research on and that influence really mess with how I could explore it and how I can play with it. And like what different processes might make sense based off of what different ideas they were bringing forward with it. And sometimes even that'll influence them back in different ways. Because I think it's keeping an open mind without any expectations beforehand. Any failures are just, it's a little easier to shrug them off and just kind of go with the next one and see what happens from it.
That's a good point.
I think that's important because when you're doing a collaboration, you're really creating a new language. I mean, it's something by definition that didn't exist before.
Yeah, that's true.
So you don't know how to deal with it because as it grows, it's new. So in going forward, you have to your point, you have to kind of understand where everybody is in the project and what it is that you're producing. And then figure out what to do with it to get to the next step.
Well, it's interesting because we work together as a collaboration all the time. So any collaboration we do is a 3-way collaboration. So that complicates things. And we work totally differently. We come from different ways all the time. So we're doing this project about making letterpress type on a 3D printer that was going to be printed with traditional type. And you know, as artists, we had textures. We thought it was beautiful. We showed it to the letterpress artists. They're like, what is this? This is crazy. We go, isn't it great? They go, no. So we have to make it smooth. So I'm already like, oh, this is too complicated. But he could work on a problem to the point where I usually take our art away because if I don't stop him, it gets to the point where it's not spontaneous, it's dead. So I usually, the way we do art is I stop him from going on. So, but this I had to encourage him to continue. So we had to bring in Shapeways. So we were the collaborators working with Purgatory Pie Press, which was a husband and wife team that's been working together for 40 years, and then Shapeways, the manufacturer. And we were trying all the different products to see which one was actually going to work. So there was a 5-way collaboration. Oh. And none of us killed each other. So this is very good.
So yeah, there's hope. One of the last question that I wanted to ask, and it's a bit lofty, but I think, so I think we all share the sincere excitement and engagement with our work. So this is kind of the moment where I could also speculate that collaborations work out with kind of personal authenticity in the work. You have to be honest and authentic and excited, and that's kind of another foundation. But I wanted to ask kind of a bigger question because a lot of us are connected to academia, and we are kind of speaking to the student audience. And if you look at these, both of the exhibitions downstairs in the gallery and upstairs, kind of the idea about the narratives about sustainability and climate activism, and idea about, like, if we speak about nature and climate change, and kind of this moment of awareness of the fact that the world is bigger than our little happy studios or ivory tower labs. And sometimes for me, collaboration was the moment where I could step out of my own studio and engage with my role as a citizen to a certain point. And I was wondering if you could speak to the kind of the analysis of your role as a scientist or the artist or a practitioner who works between the discipline. If that like comes in, like how do you negotiate yourself and your collaborations and your work in this big crazy world that is kind of scary?
I'm not associated with academia at all, except for
Oh,
my
so-
being
sorry,
here
yeah.
in
Yeah.
school. I mean, I do get to
To drag
school
you in.
sometimes, but I've been, I don't know, kind of out in it the whole time. So I don't feel like I'm trapped in a studio.
Yeah, you're an outlier in that
Well.
sense.
I guess so.
Speaking as a scientist, I can say that we need artists. Science often beats out all art. We're taught to write very succinctly. You need to add sizzle to the steak. And my collaborations with the artists have helped immensely explain why the science is valuable. It needs to have that extra zing. For example, in the old days, you read the old books, they said the pebbles were promiscuously arranged, trying to explain what I now call non-diastrophic thermokarst involutions. It's no fun, and we need to get back to old-fashioned natural sciences where everybody, it's democratized, everybody is an artist, everybody's a scientist, everybody is a poet. And I think with the liberal arts education here at Stockton, they do a darn good job of putting us back into what really makes science fun.
I think that's an important point, because when you're writing, not that I've written many, but when you're writing a scientific paper, you're writing it in a way that you're conveying the most information as succinctly as possible to somebody in a very clear, concise way so that they can take it and move it forward. But when you speak to the scientists, they're very excited about their work, but it can't come through in the paper because the paper has to be written in a specific way so that the paper can be used to progress the research. So I think these collaborations are great because you can capture that excitement. You can take that information and put it out in a different way so that people maybe can interpret it in different ways and bring it into their kind of knowledge base. Apart from the terms of art that you have to use to convey the information within the field. And that for me is like what's the most exciting part about the collaborations. You were saying people are committed to the work that they do, but it doesn't necessarily come out in the papers.
I think that's interesting and something that came up. It was a big surprise to me because I was talking about our project in the terms of what my role in it was, which was testing the pigments, making sure they work, and then I was like, okay, it's pigments, it works, look, I made a painting, And when I was initially got more and more requests to do public speaking, which I'm still terrified of, what I didn't understand at the time was that they weren't really interested in my art as much, or even in the project as much. What they wanted to talk about was how the collaboration worked, was how specifically science and art got together to tell the story in a way that was an exciting story, but was also actually solving a problem, right? So suddenly having to decide that, was I going to stay in the artist shell and talk about it from a visual artist language standpoint, or was I going to go and try to actually learn as much science as I could about it to be able to speak to it in a bigger sense, right? And that was very scary and something I'm still working on a lot, but deciding that role was important enough and meant enough to future generations and to us right now that I should try to take that on, even though I feel very inadequate about it all the time. I think that aspect, bringing that conversation together, it has really broadened out the kind of emails I get, the kind of students that reach out to me, the kind of other collaborations that people are requesting of me. So the more us, I think, doing what we do can get out there and talk about how that functions and changes the art-science dialogue out there, I think that's the biggest, most important impact we can have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, to just build on to that, the current collaboration I did for the latest iteration of the portfolio, I mean, first time I went into Charles's lab was just this great space, all these samples of algae, all these different things, all these different containers, took me into his, he has a whole room that's just set up for blacklight microscope work to be able to fluoresce stuff, and it was just, you could see he was a kid in a candy shop talking to me about it, how excited he was to kind of be able to just talk and not have to worry about the terminology and all these other things he's having to put into the papers and build into the papers. And here he's like, I can just talk to you about it. I can just explain it however I want to. And it totally hit point when we started getting down to really focusing on Akashua and Amebophyria as what we wanted to kind of play with in this relationship between this algae and this virus that was kind of eating into the algae. Because the virus actually kind of goes into, or the Amebophyria goes into the Akashua and then bursts out of it like alien. And that was his best way of explaining it. And he was like, it's just like, I mean, it aliens out of the Akashua. And he was just like so excited to talk about it in that way versus being like, well, it penetrates and then diverges out and like not having to stick to certain lingo. And I was like, but it made so much sense. And the idea I immediately understood. And then watching videos of it, I was like, you can totally see this. It does kind of like burst out of it and kind of just moves on and continues to build. And I think that ease of being able to talk a little bit more openly because you're talking to somebody who's interested in your work but not interested in it in a very specific research way, I think also helps build that relationship a little bit more and allows for more freedom of ideas to move about.
I wanted to connect back to a couple of things that y'all were saying. How do we position this work being maybe in academia but also embedded within this larger, rapidly changing global world? I would say that my message would be to department chairs, and I'm looking at the camera, provosts, deans, committees who do promotion and tenure. We have to make space for interdisciplinary work. It's incredibly important. And that's where we are in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And because I'm at Antioch College, which is, I think, founded in like the 1850s, but has long been a liberal arts college that has really valued a lot of interdisciplinary work. It's the only other school that I've been to, in addition to Stockton, where the art and the science faculty are literally interdigitated in the same building. My office is across from the theater and performance faculty. My studio printmaking colleagues are across from my environmental science lab. So there's all this opportunity for these like interesting conversations. I'm always stopping and looking at their work that they're producing. People pop into my lab and they're like, ooh, you're teaching botany next term. I'm like, yes, I am. So we are doing this work, but we are being punished as academicians by our fields and by our institutions for stepping outside your lane. So we need to be more broad and recognize that this is where we are solving problems in the 21st century. So that's kind of like, you know, me making a really like a plea for thinking about loosening up some of these boundaries. But also, I love the word that you meant, democratization. There's a hunger for this. You know, people are rejecting the fact that published peer-reviewed papers are behind paywalls and are very expensive. We're losing our ability to use everyday language to engage and talk to people. And I have to give a shout out to two of my influences. One of them is Nalini Nadkarni, who is a tropical canopy biologist, and she's been doing collaborations with musicians, with artists, you know, rap artists, you name it. She's even done a really interesting rebranding of Barbies, and this is like 20 years ago. She went to Goodwill, got a bunch of Barbies, and then had someone make forest research outfits for them. And so now Mattel is actually, 20 years later, going to be rebranding the Canopy Treetop Barbie. So Nalini's been really doing a lot of amazing work. And to the idea of illustration and poetry, there's a professor, I think an emeritus professor now, who's French, Francis Hallé, and he has published a book called The Atlas of Poetic Botany. And I think poetic thinking is incredibly important, the precision of language, the idea that we can put our passion and our love into our work. So I think people have been doing this, and I mentioned it's been kind of a side hustle. So Nalini's been a spectacularly successful scientist, as has Francis Hallé, but they've been kind of feeding the side of themselves, and I think that we need to encourage students to do that as well as encouraging, I guess, the power structures that we work within to value the innovation of this.
But I think the moment that even the fact that we can gather together, like Stockton is this, I agree, like this weird outlier, and that's what excites me about working here, because this project is sponsored by 2020 grant that has a buy-in from visual arts, like School of Arts and Humanities and School of Natural Science and Mathematics. So there is like a collaboration between deans, like it's a good thing to do. But also, and I agree, to wrap it up, I think, and to say for the students, yes, if you collaborate with people, and I think your stories testify to that, you will get to not only experience your passion in a, like, look at the beauty or look at the things that excite you in a different way, because you'll meet with the people who see the same world slightly differently, but you get excited about this same fantastic thing. It will enrich your language, and you will meet like more fantastic weirdos than you have ever thought you could. And I think this is one of the reasons why, you know, we are in a liberal arts or creative or the scientific disciplines, because we somehow are excited about this world. So, but I want to sincerely thank you for talking to us.
Thanks for bringing us together.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting.